There we go. We are live. All right. Good evening, YouTube. All right, Duff, say hello.
Hey
Hey
everyone.
everyone. So, everyone, as you can tell from the title, we're going to go and have in theory, a very short discussion over the two topics here, but they probably will take longer than that. If you have not heard or have been living under a rock, I guess, what do you call the notification, advancements to get Judge Brett Kavanaugh elected to the Supreme Court has taken place. We've seen a lot of craziness happen in the room with Democrats going crazy over he's going to kill all women and other fun things like that. And the supporters saying he's fine, let's go through. So it has been crazy. If you don't know about this, you need to watch countless videos on people screaming, being taken out of the courtroom, and just doing ridiculous things and trying to get this guy to prove that this nominee is just the worst person on earth. It's just, Hitler's assistant, if you will. So a lot of craziness going on there. As it has been proven several times, Kavanaugh's fine, there's nothing wrong, he'll get through. Republicans have the majority, so it's kind of just a way to watch. I don't want to say reality TV, but just a little bit ridiculous to see all this happening and stuff. So all that's going on. One thing I will say is it was interesting to see. I believe Senator DeSasse, and I might have said his name wrong. He actually had a good, I thought, discussion over how things in the White House, our government currently, is working compared to how it should work. So I can't remember the name of the video, but the very 30 second conversation over that is he talked about people leading that no one knows about and that kind of thing, and how corrupt the government is and how it got that way and that kind of stuff. So anyway, just a bunch of craziness happened. But anyway, Jeff, I'm imagining you've seen stuff there. Any first rate opinion or any thoughts on what's going on so far?
Well, so the Supreme Court nomination, or the circus that is amazing considering that compared to Judge Gorsuch, Judge Kavanaugh is a far more vanilla figure, at least coming from the left. So they are basically making real the old adage that if you don't have a position, beat the precedent. If you don't have a precedent, I think it's beat the listener or something like that, which it's essentially saying that you just keep on yelling louder until something sticks, or you just become increasingly more outrageous till nothing works. And this is where, on the first day of the proceedings, of course, you have the Democrat members basically saying, like, we wish to bring this to an end. We wish to put a motion forward to end the proceedings. We wish to put a motion forward to end the proceedings. And the thing is, if you're going to put a motion forward, you actually have to let the speaker open the proceedings to the floor. And if you don't let them do that, then they can't actually do that. And this is just an example of people who know how the system works trying to mess with it as much as they can, because that's the only way they can get attention on something, or particularly on themselves, on a nomination which, as far as things go, once again, pretty vanilla.
Yeah, actually, that's new. That I didn't know he was as or more vanilla than Gorsuch. That's see. So yeah, I mean, and like I said, hopefully this all ends. He gets through, and we pass this through. I was curious actually. You reminded me. Did you hear, Jeff, that there was I can't remember her name, but the wife of a senator, I guess, was making a white power symbol, even though that was a bit ridiculous. And she is, I believe, actually, I want to say half Mexican and something else. Did you
No,
know?
that wasn't a wife of a senator. That was actually a legal assistant to Judge Gorsuch. So she worked for his firm, and also worked as an assistant to him directly. And so there was two incidences that came out of that. The first one was literally she just sort of crossed and uncrossed her arms, and when she did, it looked like she made the OK symbol. And of course, CNN and the established news media does not understand meme culture at all, considering the OK symbol as white power symbol came from 4chan, and 4chan is the trolliest troll site that there has ever been. And so later on, after this uproar over nothing, she did it again just to screw with people, because at that point she's just like, geez, you're trying to make fun of anything, so I'm going to make fun of you some more. Let's see how many let's see how many talking heads I can make explode by doing this.
Yeah, that was pretty. That was wow. It was pretty great. That's I can't believe that anything that, and I still don't think that they have gotten that idea of what she did. So it's kind of hilarious on both those ends too. But so that's just crazy. And I mean, I've also been told that these hearings are kind of dumb. You know, we've already made the decision, and thanks to right now what Harry Reid's done back in the day with the majority rule, we kind of don't have all this stuff happening. So, would you agree that the whole all these Democrats that try to just grandstand about their beliefs and stuff is kind of just TV, and this whole hearing is kind of moot. If that's fair to say.
As things stand now, it has no bearing on whether or not Kavanaugh will be accepted. It's not as if a Republican majority Senate is going to say, no, we don't want the Republican candidate to be on the Supreme Court. Where this comes from, though, this actual proceeding, it's supposed to be an opportunity to make the judge known so that you can kind of think of them in terms of how they describe what they're going to do, as if by talking about what they would do in certain cases, you could predict how they will vote in the future. And that is kind of a nothing statement as well, because depending on what's put in front of you, you have to go with what the law says or come up with some really arcane explanation of why you're going to do what you're going to do. And if you're on the side of a legal disagreement that requires that arcane explanation, you actually really don't want a literalist or a as written legal scholar on the Supreme Court, because then you know what they're going to do and there's less wiggle room. And so the big problem, I think, with the process itself is not that it's not coming from a good place, in that we want to make sure that we know the Supreme Court nominees as much as we can and get some idea about what they're doing. But they don't really ask questions expecting in-depth responses, because they don't want that. They want headlines, which they can do. Judge Kavanaugh says abortion is terrible. We'll repeal abortion. And it's like, well, you're not going to get somebody to say that. And the more you go after it, the more absurd what you're doing will appear. But that doesn't really seem to matter in the modern sort of media world of clicks. But what are your thoughts there, AAA?
Hello?
Oh, were we dead for a sec there?
No, my mic's being a little funny every now and then. One second. Hello, hello, hello.
So what do you think of the proceedings then, AAA?
Yeah, I think that the okay, I think we're good now. Yeah, I think it's kind of dumb, and it's very annoying to hear all the. I mean, even before it was like whoever Trump picks, we're gonna hate and be against. I was like, well, what? Anyone you deem or anyone he picks is going to be dumb. I don't. What? Why? I mean, this is democracy, so why would that be a thing? So this is all a little ridiculous. And again, that's just I think both nominees Trump's made have been decent. I think you can make the argument that it's not the best one, but I mean, out of anyone you could have picked, they both seem to be very much follow the law and read what's on paper and follow that way. So they're have their head on straight, which is the most important thing here. So I mean, I don't. I think that the screaming and crying is a little bit ridiculous, especially when a bunch of the. Actually, I think during the proceedings there are a few stories about how the media says, oh well, Kavanaugh is against women and he wants to go and make dirty water and or dirty air and all these ridiculous claims. And I'm like, it's very interesting to me to see how okay, you don't like this person and you want to get him kicked out, and so now we're gonna have all these ridiculous titles say, oh, he's gonna be the person to create the apocalypse. So it's very interesting to see that every time it's just the end of the world, they say, okay, well, this is the way we're going to go and get rid of X person that we don't like, and it's never worked. So it's just kind of I guess smacking your head against the wall to see how the the rationale behind, okay, well, we don't like this person, so let's turn him into the Satan, and then eventually we'll get our way. Well, it's really not worked, so I just don't get why they keep doing it and stuff. And again, we keep getting these very middle ground people, and so I guess it'd be interesting to see if Trump or whoever would ever pick a not radical, but maybe a slightly leaning one way or the next. How crazy would it go? But I'm surprised by how that they're putting behind. Well, this is the worst person ever. So if everyone they pick is the worst person ever, and all these people are the worst, then I guess I don't, as we've already described, we're kind of destroying the definition of, well, here's Hitler, here's Nazi, here's X insult here, and then destroying what all these things stuff. So it's in a way I hope that they never learn, but at the same time it's pretty easy to see that we're all getting really tired of the antics and hysteria behind anything they don't like. And
Well,
so I guess that's kind of my feeling there. If that makes sense.
I think the other thing that we need to be aware of is they have to make this type of noise
Right.
because the judiciary, at least in terms of the picks which Trump is putting in, uh, is falling back into its written role, which is it's not supposed to be the thing that is passing laws ad hoc. That is supposed to be the Congress and the Senate. And because both Congress and Senate are Republican at the moment, the only thing which the Democrats could really push for, especially if in, let's say, the next American election cycle, the Republicans actually maintain either the Senate or the Congress, and there's a Democratic president elected, they need the judiciary to try and pass laws as opposed to come to decisions about things, because otherwise they won't be able to get any of their policies through in a tangible way. Trump, I'm not sure if it's Trump, but Paul Ryan and the people who are in the Congress and also in the Senate have actually been pretty good about getting bills passed through recently, which means that they've had to have support from Democrats as well. And the great irony for the Democrats is you could have someone who is extremely left-leaning and also be a literalist, be a candidate to be a judge on the Supreme Court. And that person would most likely come to decisions with the other literalists and be in agreement with them. And sort of a caveat to that, considering so much is being made of the Roe versus Wade precedent, it seems that the Democrats aren't aware or aren't willing to give credence to the idea that even if you are pro-abortion, which I actually happen to be, the wording of the wording of that particular legal precedent isn't the best. In fact, Anton Scalia and others who are members of the who were involved in the process and dissenting votes and whatnot, were essentially saying this bill is done wrong. It does what you guys want it to do, but if you look at how it goes about arguing its reasoning, it's done poorly. So I would love to see a judicial nominee come up and say, actually, I want to overturn Roe versus Wade because I don't think it's actually that good of a legal treatise. We need to go about it in a slightly different way that is more robustly defensible, and watch the media explode.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. So you're not. I mean, you'd always make the case that if he is, or when he's nominated, it's not this. He is going to be the end all be all of things, and well, we think that X decision is going to be made. So you are obviously fine the that argument of, well, he's going to go and destroy abortion. Like you're definitely, it's not that bad. Right.
Well, the thing is, okay, that isn't an argument to begin with. The assumption that one judge can overturn precedent by themselves is completely wrong. You need to have a majority vote amongst those who are sitting on the Supreme Court. And most conservatives conserve things which already exist because it becomes part of the corpus of the society. So it would be really, really hard from a pure conservative perspective to turn over something like gay marriage, because from the conservation of that which is good, going completely Lockean on this, gay marriage hasn't destroyed the world. It doesn't seem to have any adverse effects beyond the adverse effects that happened between heterosexual marriages. So why on earth would you try and overturn it? Uh, in the same way, abortions, although there are people on the religious right and also people on the religious left who see it as murder. And when you get right down to it, yeah, it is. But when you get to abortion and the idea that women, being free thinking individuals, should have the right to make choices about their body and the biological processes that give life to new life, that's something which you can't really overturn from a conservative perspective. If you're conserving the idea that women are supposed to have rights, and part of those rights are rights over their own bodies. So it becomes a non-entity that they're trying to harp on without much real substance behind it.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to make sure I understand this. So I guess we can have a different discussion about pro-life and non at a different time, which we can get into. But I guess if I understand you correctly, I guess the worry I would have is what I understand now is given our own way, we have okay, abortion is a right, and that's interesting. I I for one am not saying I think that a woman should have the right to do it, but I don't agree with the fact of okay, we're going to make everyone pay for this right because well, you don't really pay for right. If that makes sense. There's actually a bit of a digression. I watched a video by Dinesh D'Souza who made this argument too. Someone actually gave him the why is abortion right? All this kind of stuff, and he made the argument of well, a it's not the Constitution, but b you don't really we're not what do I say we're not supporting the right to do this as in a monetary kind of thing. We're not so like the freedom of speech. We have the right to speak what we want to say. But we're not that doesn't mean okay we're going to go and say I have the right to speak. I have the right for my own news station, magazine, whatever else I'm going to produce and say what I want to say. Listen to me. Here's my newspaper, all that kind of fun stuff. But now we have the right to firearm. Decide oh I get a gun for free. Blah blah blah. I get to have as many guns as I want, whatever capacity I want to have. We should have the ability to get stuff, and the government cannot take that away from us. So it's, I guess, again, I'm not sure this is quite what we're talking about, but how I was understanding it was, they're saying, okay, we are going to make sure that the government is responsible to fund this decision that you make. Again, I'm not against people doing what they want to do. I'm more against saying, hey, here is a decision we're going to make, and whether you like it or not, you get to pay for it. Like, I think if
Yeah.
you want to do it, go for it. But don't say, okay, well, this is what I think is true. Here's the gun. Here's your head. You must do what I want to think. I think you just be able to do what you want to do, and I don't have to think it's right. I can let you get in your way. And I'm not sure if that's where you're going with that. Maybe
So,
not.
no, what you're articulating there, AAA, is more of a libertarian take on it, meaning that uh, as a right, sure, but I should not have to pay for something which is elective on your behalf. And so that's from the perspective that I take, that isn't necessarily a conservative argument, but rather an argument from the first principles of libertarianism, mostly the non-interference act. So it's like government should not be taking money from you that you do not choose to give and not be allocating it for things which you do not want it to be allocated for. So the argument which you're putting forward, and which the Democrats are putting forward in an indirect sort of way, is that they feel that it's likely that Kavanaugh might vote for bills that take abortion off the list of subsidized services that the government provides. And he might. I don't think so. There doesn't appear to be anything in his past that would indicate that, but that's the fear, because abortion or the right to abortion isn't treated as being separate from the right for having an abortion subsidized by a medical insurance plan, let's say. Is that kind of what you're pointing out?
I think in a way, yeah. I think that and yeah, I mean, I'm not. I guess I've learned recently that I thought it was very, well, not very, but I thought it was basic conservative, and now I'm realizing that I'm kind of quasi-conservative libertarian ish, and then I have a gray area in that regard. But yeah, I think that there should be. I mean, essentially, the idea is if I don't like your opinion, your decision, I should not have to support such funds as whatever else. Because anything, I don't expect you guys or anyone to pay for my stuff, my healthcare, all that. I think I should pay for what I want, and that's kind of where it starts, that's where it goes. So I think that if they fix that, then we'd all be okay. And that is more or less the argument there too. And that's why I hate the whole, well, we're gonna go and women's right, blah blah blah. And I go, yeah, no one's really taking away the right. I think that's the confusion. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and it actually gets into oh shoot, what's the podcaster on Daily Wire, Michael Knowles? So Michael Knowles on Friday had a doctor who was a representative of the Women's Reproductive Rights something of America, and it was interesting to see the breakdown of what Knowles was trying to get at versus what the doctor was saying they did. Knowles was trying to get into a discussion of at what point does terminating a fetus constitute murder? And from my perspective, it's like the moment you abort it, of course. Um, but should you be extending rights to a fetus at X many months? And as a extension of that, should you make sure that you do not allow late-term abortions because you're actually killing a living being? And the doctor, of course, was simply saying, what we offer in terms of reproductive services involves giving women the opportunity for early term abortion treatments, whether that be a pill, whether that be a surgery, or other things. And so the arguments become separate. So what Knowles was going for was a moral argument, and what the doctor was going for was a pragmatic argument. And where I come down is essentially if you if you teach people how to have safe sex, and you teach people to be very aware of what they're doing and the potential consequences, the amount of abortions in society should, on the whole, be going down. There are some uncontrolled factors, but with that being said, abortion is still very much a viable thing. If you don't want to be a parent, and if society is not willing to pay to have the egg sucked out of you and put in some sort of artificial womb, then you shouldn't really be strapped with a 9-month sentence. However, I would prefer that that child be born. So you come into that sort of 51 one way, 49 the other, where it's like I'm 51% pro-abortion and 49% pro-life. But I also want to make sure that the things which would ensure that the child live are put in place, because that's ultimately what reproduction is supposed to be about. And this is why it becomes such a thorny issue, which the Democrats right now like to harp upon, is because they can pull things from intersectional feminism to say this isn't fair. Men can be as sexually promiscuous as they like, and they're never stuck with this 9 months and then lifelong commitment directly. So therefore, we need to give women the ability to be as promiscuous as they would potentially like, in the guise of saying, well, if you have an accident or an accidental pregnancy, better a kid not be derived from an accident than from purposeful attempts at becoming a parent. So there's all these ins and outs which become huge fodder politically, especially for the party that claims that it's on the side of women.
Okay, I guess so. So now that we're kind of going down this theory anyway, it sounds like you're saying you prefer that the child be born, correct?
If possible, yeah.
So I guess I was under the assumption I was kind of pro-life, but it sounds like you think that's not pro-life. So I guess I'm trying to figure out where we're disagreeing.
So the reason why I would say it's the 51-49 breakdown is just sort of because of terminology. So pro-life is stereotypically understood to mean that at no point would you consider abortion to be an appropriate means of contraception. In fact, that's not contraception at all. It's murder, which it is. But within the construct of the rider term, I would prefer that there be life. However, I would also prefer that that life is brought into being into a situation where it has an optimal outcome for survival and thriving. And so if someone believes they will not be a good mom and they fully intend to drink through pregnancy, you should probably abort that fetus.
Well, then so it sounds like you're more for pro-life, and you're saying that I wish that we had good parents, but if the parents aren't great, then the best thing to do for the child would be to, I mean, at that point, maybe there's adoption at that point, maybe is this,
No. Once again, there's the 9-month sentence. So if you as a dude could have an artificial womb implanted in you and take the kid and deal with it for 9 months, would you?
Okay, so this sounds like more of a practical argument as opposed to a moral one. You're just saying, okay, in this case, you're saying I'd rather have a kid be good than be born bad, and I realize that, and you're saying that because it tends to be the case where they're bad, we're not gonna have to, give that bad kid the bad life. Is that fair?
No, the kid's neither good or bad in this. It's more, I would prefer that the child go into a more optimal circumstance, typically defined by the fact that the parent wants them, than to be brought into a circumstance where the parent does not want them, especially if the parent does not want them to such a degree that they are basically acting in ways which will damage that child both psychologically and physically. A damaged person is not necessarily a bad person, but you would prefer to reduce the number of damaged individuals coming into the world. Technically, right?
Sure, no, and I'm gonna. Okay, the word bad was not a great adjective. So, but it sounds like you're saying, okay, if the world was perfect and everyone wanted to have kids, let everyone have kids, and then we'd be good to go. Unfortunately, realistically speaking, people have sex. They don't mean to. They get pregnant, and if they don't want a kid, then we want to the best possible opportunities, the kids with the best possible opportunities to be born, and those that are not to do with the kids' decisions, but with mother's decisions. If she's making poor decisions, then we want to make the kid's life as easy as possible because the mom's not doing that. Maybe those kids are harder to bring into the world. Is that fair to say?
Not necessarily bring into the world, but rather at the point of conception or the point at which pregnancy is now underway. On the whole, it would seem better that people who wish to be parents would be the ones who would continue with the pregnancy. Now, that doesn't mean that the person wishing to be a parent is going to be a good parent. And that doesn't mean that parents who didn't want a kid can't end up being good parents at the time. So didn't want it at the time of conception. But rather, if you want to erase kind of the vagueness around that, if someone does not wish to be pregnant and they have engaged in an activity having either used protection or perhaps not, which is sad because they should, and they become pregnant and they're like, I don't want this. It's like, well, okay, well, here's the pill. But if you're humming and hawing, maybe wait. But, and this is something the doctor pointed out, better early than later, simply because of the complications to the mom, but also the longer a child is gestating, the more human it is. Not that it ever wasn't human, and the less I feel predisposed towards saying that's still a good thing. So better early and always early than as late as you want it. And it's just like, no. At that point, it looks too human. Therefore, it's human in my eyes. Can't do anything to it.
Okay, and I guess my point was, it sounds like you are leaning towards pro-life, yet you understand that it might be better for the child and the mother in the long run to say, well, if you're making bad decisions now, it's going to be very hard to do, so let's kind of cut our losses. And that's, I mean, an argument to be
Well, I'd say I'm a life enthusiast.
Okay. Yeah, well, and I agree. I think that if you're going to have, and I think we're both endorsing if you're not married, if you're not planning on having a family, or if you're not, committed, then yes, use protection, please. Safe sex, all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think that we can. That's fair to
I
say. I agree. I think that if you can uh, save the child, then obviously do that thing, and let's have very healthy babies. I I really don't. I get what you're saying. I am not sure my opinion on that yet. I mean, again, I'm very much for the whole. If you don't have sex, then be abstinent. Take the pill. Take whatever. There are other ways to resolve your issues. But if it gets down to the hey, she's drinking, whatever, I would have to kind of think about that more. But I definitely get where you're coming from with the
Oh
what's
yeah, no,
best
for
for
sure.
both.
I think the meat of it goes back to the singular thing, which is that um, right now you would prefer that you not have to subsidize a elective treatment, as it were. And I'm of that opinion too. But if the government's not going to subsidize an elective treatment, then it has to make sure that those treatments are readily available and affordable. And that doesn't necessarily require subsidy, whereas the way they are doing it now demands the subsidization of what's going on. So I think that's the only real gray area.
No, I think that's fair, and that's what I mean. It's again a lot of these major quote unquote arguments and issues that we like. Oh, what about like? It's not really that big of a deal. They're very quote honestly simple solutions, but got to make a tears fall and that kind of thing for something. That's that's the big selling point thing. So, but no, I think you and I are mostly on the same page. Again, I'm a little bit gray area to exactly what goes on there. But I mean, at that rate, then another solution to the problem is okay. Let's go and very much educate kids and teens and whoever else. Say, hey, this is what happens. Here's what science says. Here's the decisions you make, and if you fall off the tracks, then it's not the end of the world. Here are the options that you have. Best way to get out
Well,
of that.
I'm all for those campaigns that want to make parenthood desirable again. And I think that's perhaps one of the weird knock-on effects of our society as it is you actually have many people who essentially say, I don't want to have kids because the world is terrible. I hate the fact that my kid would be entitled, and I don't want him or her to be eating the food that could be feeding someone who's more deserving. And it's like, well, what makes them more deserving? Well, those people suffer more, therefore they're more deserving. And it's like, that's not something which you should bring into the equation of kids. You want to have kids because you're going to pass on something into the future. And if you're going to pass something on, make sure it's good. Make sure you're involved. Make sure you love that kid so they love their kid. Because otherwise, what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great to have, the well, and then again, that's a bit of a digression, but that's kind of like the whole well, here's the marriage thing, and here's all this fun stuff, and let's go and try to like, here's the relationship stuff. Actually had bit of a side note. When I went to see my parents this past weekend, the second thing my mom after my mom's, hey, are you eating right? And I said, yes, I'm eating things fine. I'm not cooking things, but I'm eating things fine. She asked about my dating life, and I told her why my opinion dating would be so hard to do with people my own age. Why don't you find someone? I'm like, because people that are my own age don't share all the values I have, and I'm willing to wait for someone to say, hey, break all this fun stuff, as opposed to, oh, hey, well, maybe sure, why not? Let's go and do the social media app thing, and the whole avenue of instant gratification, or let's pick and choose who we want to do it. It's not where we're taking all the personality of someone and throwing it on a page or whoever and trying to say, oh, hey, you're going to make a great wife slash ex-wife slash whomever. And it's just the whole thing's bad. But no, I agree. Kids are good. Good to try and have more of them, raise them to be great. And when it comes to well, we don't. They are suffering more than I am, so I can't enjoy this. Well, suffering is sorry, kind of subjective because everyone suffers differently for different reasons. So I don't think it's the whole. Well, he lives in the hut in the desert and has to travel 3 miles for water, so I can't be happy because they're not happy, which is a very stupid argument because we're all different. I'm sure that people over there are happier than people over here when it comes to what they do and don't have. The whole that's kind of weird. But anyway, the very odd thing to do. But I guess you and I can both agree that we hope relationships and people are more educated overall when it comes to relationships, babies, and that kind of thing, right? Yeah. Sorry to say something.
No, and like it's one of those ones. And so uh, Andrew Clavin actually read a portion of Justice Scalia's dissenting view on uh, the approval of gay marriage in the United States. And what was so interesting about it is Scalia didn't come out and say, I'm against this. Rather, what he said was, this is an example of an abuse of the judicial branch of the government. The American people were having robust discussions about this topic. And yes, there were bad things that happened, because there were many. But in a democratic process, the wheels were turning, and this was going to come in one way or another. The fast tracking of that process by fiat, or by, in this case, judicial determinants, kind of hamstrings things. And this is very much what the Democrats are trying to do with Kavanaugh's appointment. They're trying to make sure that they can still maintain, or that there is the ability to pass instantaneous laws as they see fit, as opposed to actually having to work their way through this discussion amongst the American populace. So, as per usual, most politicians aren't actually that fond of their populace. In fact, most politicians believe themselves to be better than their populace. And this is where we see sort of the classicism of the Democratic Party coming to the fore, and also the use of this proceedings as a way of ingratiating themselves to the public, so that when it comes time for the Democratic primaries for their new leader, Kamala Harris and others will be familiar faces that people can relate to. So this is more about free publicity than it is about Judge Kavanaugh. But yeah, was there anything else on this topic you wanted to get at there, AAA?
I think we've discussed it pretty thoroughly. He'll get into the cabinets, and they will cry some more about this stuff, and it'll be another headline there. But no, I just thought that it was interesting to see. I thought that the how easily they were triggered, how many times they were triggered, and all of the strings they tried to pull. But it's and unfortunately nothing new that we haven't seen before. They're gonna keep screaming, crying, but he's gonna get in there, and that's fine. So they should just stop what they're doing and get over themselves. Guys, just do it. But anyway,
Well, or more so perhaps, because I'm always for a robust political dialogue that's actually based on substance. Get somebody in there who's actually going to raise points which are salient, as opposed to obfuscating as much as you can. So get someone to sit down and say, Judge Kavanaugh, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on the Supreme Court's role in the political system? And should it be used to circumvent stuff? Or are there instances where judicial fiat is actually good for circumventing long drawn out political processes that need to be completed now because of other problems that are going on? But I don't think we're going to be getting that.
no, that would be a reasonable discussion, and you see how human cabinet is. It also says, "Oh, Democrats, you are free." What? Which there have been other commercials about Democrats talking about, you want to vote for them? Okay, here's how crazy they are, and it's not hard to get footage of them being crazy. So it's again, we're not living in we're in the Trumpian crazy era, so nothing is taken seriously, and we need headlines.
Now, AAA, have you heard about the mole?
I have heard about it. I don't know much about it, but if you want to give more detail to our listeners, go for it.
So in a fascinating turn of events, almost Machiavellian in nature. The New York Times released a anonymous op-ed from a White House staffer complaining about Trump and saying that there is essentially a shadow cabinet of people in the White House who have to keep the president on track because there's many things with which he has odd opinions on, and therefore this person believes that the American populace needs to be aware of the resistance and the resistance movement. And the great irony being, well, of course, you're supposed to try and influence the president if you work in the White House. That's your job. But yeah, no. What else have you heard? I know you said you hadn't seen too much about it, but what do you think about that? An op-ed about somebody essentially saying, "I'm doing my job. Recognize me."
Yeah, I heard a story, and it was kind of like that. But the story I heard was about some higher up, again, as you put anonymous, some higher up official in the White House saying, "Oh, well, I'm actually with you guys, and I'm feeding Trump what he should do and stuff. So don't worry, we're gonna take." I think I even heard it was almost it's a black ops, if you will, kind of coup. We're trying to make sure that he screws up the way that whatever else, or we're putting in place to make sure that one day we'll get our way and we're gonna get rid of Trump. Again, no really rhyme or reason or any proof behind any of this kind of stuff. It's the whole like, all right, we got your back, winky face kind of deal. So it's very interesting to see, and I agree. I would hope that there's someone at Trump's side to go, hey, that's no, we're not doing that. That's not how that something goes. And so it's interesting to hear. And again, the sad part is, it seems like it's the world we're living in right now when it comes to politics. It sounds like it should be written in crazy, just crazy novel. It shouldn't be real, and it should not be this. I mean, again, we're watching a TV series playing at the White House, so it's just ridiculous. So yeah, I think that someone just really wants to go and promote how well they do their job and stuff, or maybe they're not doing it very well and they want to get credit for something else. So who knows how that's going to be? But
Well,
actually, then that reminds me, there was also a story about I can't remember the guy's name. He wrote a book talking about all the discussing things that Trump has done or whatever, and said talked about, well, I've got all these sources that tell me that Trump has said, and or no, it was he made the comment about how General Mathis said that he talked to Trump about something, some secret plan or something about how a certain country was. Commented that Trump was too dumb. It was like getting like seventh grader to learn sort of count.
I can help you out on that one though, Triple
Oh,
A.
go
So
for it. Sorry, that was
this particular instance, or the one which is made the rounds, is that when going through the whole thing with Kim Jong Un, Trump basically or allegedly was like, so why are we defending South Korea again? Why are we footing the bill for them? And of course, according to the author, General Mattis said, well, we kind of have to because they're our ally. And Trump was like, okay, I guess, if that's what you say. So bringing to the fore the idea that Trump is not actually a master diplomat and doesn't actually understand all the ins and outs of America's, labyrinthine alliance system, which is true. I would be surprised if there's many people who actually understand all the reasoning for all the alliances that the United States has, and that's true of most countries. But of course, spinning it in such a way that if you don't think about it critically, people are going to be like, or at least the base they're trying to appeal to are like, oh my God, Trump's useless. And it's like, well, sure. But it's not as if he said, oh yeah, we're going to get out of this alliance because I don't like South Koreans. It's like, no, he didn't say that. And that's not what they were claiming. But this also gets into what I see in a sort of a tinfoil hat moment as a bit of a deliberate strategy. The media hasn't been able to do too much to get Trump to do something stupid. So they're turning to other means. And so when it comes to this anonymous report in the New York Times, the way it's worded, once again, if I'm wearing my tinfoil hat, it's trying to draw out the divides in the Republican Party. Because one of the things it says is that Trump is not a true conservative. He's only recently come to the conservative side of things. Therefore, we need to keep him on the straight and narrow when it comes to conservative issues, which is probably true. But that sort of compartmentalizes the traditional conservative elements of the Republican Party. And then it sort of speaks to the more progressive elements of the Republican Party by trying to talk about how he or she, whoever this person is trying to prevent Trump from enacting on his regressive tendencies. And so you're splitting the Republican Party up into its base components and trying to sort of incite unrest by doing so. So I have a feeling we're going to be seeing more and more of these sideways attacks from anonymous sources, from authors who are doing unofficial biographies. And that will be the new edge of the attack, considering the media hasn't proven to be all that effective. Whereas this idea of a traitor in their midst had Trump tweeting and also has Trump quite a bit down in the opinion polls as opposed to 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's been a bad week for everything there, and I mean, not that I pay much attention to polls nowadays, because it's just well, we think that yeah, everyone's getting really tired of hearing all the craziness and that stuff. But no, that I'm glad you mentioned that, and that actually explains more about the vote and all that kind of stuff. So, again, we'll see a million more. Oh, I have the biggest on Trump things and whatever else. So that'll happen, and great, more stuff. But anyway, I think we have talked that to death enough. So I think everyone gets the picture there. But again, hopefully things work out and people will obviously keep screaming. So the other topic I want to get into, obviously, is, as you title, is all the great things that we are hearing from Mr. Colin Kaepernick, and he finally just did it. Of course, not the phrase, but the company Nike has now made Colin Kaepernick the face of their company with the newest commercial. I actually have only seen part of the commercial, but I have seen Colin Kaepernick in it, and of course the I'm pretty sure former quarterback of the 49ers is in the commercial for Nike, describing his pure sacrifice of his career to promote an idea, and it's a little bit ridiculous now, but it's very interesting to see how he is so this great American hero for standing up for what he believes. But your initial opinions or thoughts on this, third?
I think it's been interesting to watch the reaction to this from both sides. So you have the backlash of people burning Nike apparel and saying like, well, I guess Nike doesn't like money. But if we were to look at Nike's demographic sales, the African American community disproportionately buys Nike apparel in comparison to everybody else. Appealing to a sense of injury or victimhood and trying to create an easily controllable hero is great for business, especially if you're trying to get your core audience to quadruple down on what it is that they're buying. The sad thing is, we don't hear the voices from that side pushing back and going, hey, wait a second, this Colin Kaepernick guy, sure, he kneeled, but how has he suffered in any, let's say, tangible and impoverishing way through this entire thing? He's not like Muhammad Ali, who went to jail. He's not like Malcolm X, who went to jail. He's not like Martin Luther King Jr., who essentially would have been sent to jail on several occasions. In fact, he did and had to get bailed out by the likes of Billy Graham. Kaepernick has only had to forego making more money. There has been no point at which he's had everything taken away from him other than a football career, which arguably would not have gotten him as much press as what has happened with regards to the kneeling incident. And if we're being completely cynical, good on him. That's a very effective way to make money very quickly, probably more money than he would have made in his career. But I think this is one of those ones where Nike has actually done something very astute. And financially, in the short term, they'll probably benefit from it, even though their stocks have taken a bit of a dip. The other thing, which is kind of dumb, if you're burning stuff you already bought, how is that hurting Nike's bottom line?
Yeah, that's well. I mean, that was the same thing with the wasn't it a year or two ago where we had I can't remember. I think it was I want to say it was a Keurig or something, some drink machine, whatever getting was boycotting. I want to say Ingram or something. I can't remember exactly what happened, but it was the same thing happened there when they're like, "Oh, I'm against this company now," so they just started to destroy their coffee or drink. I can't remember if it was even a cooler, but they're like, "Oh, here's this product that you guys gave me, and I'm gonna go and hammer this to the ground. And this is me standing up against the company." And it's like, yeah, well, you bought the product. Now you're destroying the thing that you bought. So, worst case scenario, you have to go and buy the thing again. So that's a great lesson to someone, I guess. But yeah, I think it's interesting to see. And well, and to be fair, they have taken a bit of a dip. They lost about $4 billion after this commercial came out because it was a bit crazy. And a bunch of other people have come out saying, well, it's ridiculous that he had this um, this happened to him, and they paid him this much money. And again, to be fair, when all this was going on a year or two ago, Kaepernick was not the best quarterback in the world. He had been hired on the 49ers. He had a good run, but he didn't do so well towards the end. He was, I think, the bottom out of the list of 33 quarterbacks on the league. And then they said, okay, this is great. They tried to get him back on. He didn't like the new contract because it was not as much money as he wanted it to be. And then he started to kneel and get attention that way. And he also got paid to be commercial with Nike. So it's not as though he gave up he has money. So there's things it's not on the street. Well, it was either I do football or I do this. It's not really that thing. However, the memes about the commercial, those have been fairly funny. Jeff, I don't know if you've seen any of the memes, but they are pretty hysterical. With sacrifice this and that. Have you seen the Office meme with Peter Dwight watching?
No, I haven't actually seen any of those. From
From
my perspective, it's kind of a non-thing. I'm actually more skeptical of how corporations are choosing to now shape narratives, because they have for a long time. So I haven't really been looking for things which are meme worthy, but I'm sure there are many.
Well, and that's the actually that's part of my friend tonight about the well, they only do one of this for marketing purposes. I'm like, yeah, I think that it's one thing for marketing, but at the same time, it's one of those it's so tainted that now it's because there's okay, well, what's the controversy? Well, sure, but to a certain point, yes, I'll know the name Nike now, but the downside is now I'm associating that with okay, well, here's a person who does this thing, and so knowing the name is one thing, but then having a positive attitude towards that person is something else too. So it's very double-edged sword, and I'm not really sure that time will tell if this was a good decision or not. I don't think that this was the best decision they've ever made. And before this, I heard about Colin Kaepernick writing a book about all his stuff. That would be something to look for in the future too. But well, no. So I guess are you saying that this kind of joining of SPW stuff with companies is happening more often now? It's kind of Colin's kind of bridging the gap to really monetize the outcry of the call it I guess yeah, again SJW kind of nature.
Yeah, no, I sort of see it as right circumstance, available person, able to monetize. And that's not to say that a sports athlete can't have a voice in, let's say, social dissent or trying to raise awareness for things. But at no point have we heard Colin Kaepernick come out and actually start talking about things in a way that shows he has a deeper understanding of what's going on in any way, shape, or form. He just seems to go along with what the media is doing. So he doesn't seem to have any either insider insight or deeper understanding of the very things which he is claiming. And therefore, he strawmans himself just like many people do, based on the fact that in a society which is, although not perfect and never will be, the amount of things to complain about because of institutional bias are almost nil. So, in absence of actual hardships, you have to complain about the small minutia. And he would probably say, "Oh yes, but what about the shootings? What about this? What about that?" And very much so. It's like, okay, yes, it is disturbing that people can be killed by the police for no real reason, but you also have to acknowledge that out of the major shootings and major incidents that happened in the past 5 years, at least two of them were found to be legitimate cases of the policemen acting in the way that they should in order to defend their life. So once again, he's a celebrity ready made to fill a void and appeal to a demographic that Nike can exploit quite easily. And whenever a company that makes use of sweatshops to produce its stuff, and unironically does so, tries to be the impetus behind the creation of a hero, it's a profoundly cynical enterprise, like a profoundly cynical enterprise.
Yeah, that's fair. And again, I think that one of the major issues, again, I think that because when this all first began, it was kind of, oh, well, we should talk about police this and inequality of that, all these. But the issue was the things that he was complaining about were kind of being solved. So it was hey, guys, we need to go and make sure that people understand how bad things are for this group. Like, yeah, we know they're bad. They're getting fixed. No, they're bad, and I'm going to announce that. We know that they're bad, and there are solutions, and we're trying hard. No, but I'm saying that they're bad. And, well, okay, great news. So it's the a little ridiculous to see that, and of course, in the one clip I loved was the well, guys, people always no one knows that I want to say he's isn't he half I'm African American, and I want to say he's not even again not that it matters, but there was a interview I believe he did where he goes, oh well, people don't get that I'm half this and whatever. No one understands my racial background. It's really annoying to have to explain that I'm not just black. And we're like, well, one of the best ideas was no one should care what your background is, and you should be happy to be you, and no one needs to judge you. So on many levels, it was a bit ridiculous to hear all this nonsense come out and see, well, we're not doing enough. No, I mean, we kind of are
Yeah.
doing quite a bit. But that I don't know if you remember that storyline.
I think vaguely. The only thing which I would sort of add on to that is in terms of intrinsic cost to what Colin Kaepernick's initial protest was, it was negligible compared to what other people's would have to do. And what it also proves is that Kaepernick, um, in his actions, has shown himself not to be the best self promoter or the promoter of his ideas. He had to essentially take a free press moment to raise awareness instead of actually being able to be charismatic enough to get people to come and see him when he had a press conference beforehand, right? So it's like people went to go and see Martin Luther King Jr. because he was a charismatic individual. People would go and press would go to Malcolm X's speeches because Malcolm X was charismatic. He could pack a house. He didn't have to go like, okay, well, I'm going to kneel now and I'm going to wear pig stockings. When I know that the worst possible thing that could happen to me is I would no longer be able to work in the NFL anymore, having made millions already. Instead of by doing what I'm doing, I could be arrested by the police and jailed indefinitely, like Nelson Mandela.
Right, yeah, it's crazy there. Although I do love after the torch came out, there were several, not necessarily memes, but even I think there was a one I saw most recently was I think it was the wife of Chris Powell, and she had her spiel on Facebook where she talked about here's sacrifice, here's that, and this, and it's getting very uh more. We're definitely getting more polarized with well here is my opinion on that because after she came up with her speech with hey here are the men and women who served the armed forces and make Facebook, of course, they're like, oh well, if you're in the armed forces, not we don't need you there, and we don't want to have you doing these things. We don't agree with the job you're doing, and again, it's just more and more polarizing stuff. So it's just a bunch of craziness there, and hopefully they learn, and we'll see what happens like in the end. Again, yes, they're getting publicity, fine. There's always the phrase, any marketing is good marketing. Um, to have your name known, sure. To have people buy your stuff, I don't know. So that'll just be a time will tell thing. But it's what's done is done, and we'll find out. Other people join in and go, hey, Colin, what Colin's doing is great, or will we have a counter person saying, hey, Nike, we're not a fan of what you've done. But anyway, any last thoughts there, Duff?
No, I think we've talked about a fair few issues tonight. It's pretty good, all told.
I think you're right too. It's been probably a little less than usual, but I think it's been a great discussion here. And anyway, guys, if you're out there listening, hope you have a great weekend. Hope you guys are getting rained on. I know it's been raining here all day, which has been kind of annoying, but I'm inside now, so we're all good. And we look forward to seeing you next time here. And hopefully, we're trying to get JP back on. So if you're out there, JP, please, we'd love to have you back on the show. And until next week, we wish you guys the best. And see you soon. All right, you say goodbye, Duff.
Have a good week, everyone.
All right, guys, I'll see you next time. Thank you.